Hi, welcome back to Not So Obvious Watches. I'm Pete McConville. About 2 or 3 days ago, I did a roundup of last week's news, and one of the key articles I spoke about was Arial Adams doing a quick roundup of like half a dozen of the big issues coming out of Dubai Watch Week. I mentioned in there I wasn't going to go into detail because I wanted to use that as material for another video. Well, that video has come, and that's what we're going to do today. Now, the first topic he raised is probably, I think, the biggest and the most difficult to get your arms around, and that is that the corporate mentality that the big watch brands and the big watch groups are bringing is not healthy and in fact harming the overall direction of the watch industry. Now, very quickly, Arial made 8 really key points. The first is that industry is increasingly reliant on short-term return on investment kinds of decisions and is not willing to take a risk and is neglecting any kind of creativity. The second point he made, really an extension of that first one, is that industry, wherever possible, is looking for risk-free profits. The third point he made is that parts of the industry are recognizing that they face an existential crisis. And now I'm using existential crisis here in the correct way, the strictly correct way. And what that means is this isn't just a crisis that makes me feel really bad. This is parts of the industry are looking at what's coming and wondering, will we continue to exist? Will we be wiped out by what's happening in our industry? Point 4 was that Arial raised was that in all of the conversations he spoke to, all of the big hitters in industry all accepted that further investment and further experimentation is required if the industry is going to move forward and grow. And yet, despite this recognition across the industry, there was also a recognition by the same industry that there was insufficient resourcing insufficient investment being put into human relations, support for the designers, marketing, a whole range of the sort of backroom support stuff required to determine what sort of watches are needed, design those watches and get them out there. And on top of that, management, which is already being trimmed down and down and down, is spending more and more time on the road, which is having 2 particularly egregious problems. One, senior management is simply not in the office enough to drive really effective programs of change inside their brands. And 2, as a result of being on the road all the time, they're spending very short periods of time in any one location. So not enough to actually give them an idea of what's needed and how to drive forward, but enough that they think they've got that. Now, going back to that bit where we're talking about parts of the industry experiencing an existential crisis, Arial reports that there seems to be a feeling, a lot of people reluctant to go on the record, but are generally feeling that the community, unless something changes, the watch industry is going to get smaller before it gets bigger, and that there's probably needs to be less brands, and there probably needs to be fewer watches made. And the most interesting thing is all this doom and gloom, all this sort of negativity is against a backdrop where there's an enormous demand and a growing demand for what's regarded as safe bet watches. So watches which manufacturers can pretty much guarantee are going to sell. Now, I agree with everything Arial just said, but what's really interesting is that's a meta-analysis across lots of industry players at a big industry forum. Really curious because like within a day of listening to that, I then listened to the podcast on Tenn and Two, where the 2 girls, Kat and Catlin, were talking to some of the senior leadership of Topper's Jewelry and Laco, a German watch company. And the leadership from Laco were almost proudly saying that they were doing things the exact opposite of what was seen to be necessary by industry at Dubai. They were proudly saying that they were going to stick within their historic swim lane and not try and branch out. They were proudly saying that they are deliberately lean with very little support staff, massive emphasis on craftsmen that produce watches, but that's about it. As a result, they're proud of saying their senior management is on the road all the time. If I remember rightly, I think he said, he expects to be on the road and out of the office for 35 weeks a year. They were quite happy about the fact that there's going to be a heavy emphasis on keeping designs relatively safe and aligned with customer expectations, not challenging, not expanding, not stretching where they're going. And on that last point, I should probably stress that they also did talk about having to work very hard to overcome technical challenges to produce the designs that they were looking at. So I shouldn't really downplay the amount of effort they're making. They're putting a lot of, from a design perspective, they're staying well inside their creative swim lane. From an engineering perspective, to make those designs, I've got to give them kudos. They did say they're working very hard to stretch in the build process. And all of this raises the question, how do we reconcile the fact that when industry gets together, they know what needs to be done in order to grow the industry, but individual companies seem to be quite proudly going in exactly the opposite way, that they know what needs to be done. Now, this is a classic conflict of, economists will talk about the tragedy of the commons, where what's required for the common good and what is required for the individual player within that market can often be quite different. When individual players are challenged and have to ask themselves, why would I sub-optimize my performance, my return, against a relatively known present on the off chance, with the risk that I might be able to succeed in a comparatively uncertain future where I may be able to outstrip my opponents, but then maybe I'm not. And at the macro level, at the very biggest level, around us every day, we see governments doing exactly the same thing when it comes to climate change. Most of them are probably aware of what needs to be done at the global level, but all of them are unwilling to commit themselves to sub-optimize, and so they're all desperately hoping that someone else will find an answer. And so therefore it should probably come as no surprise that companies like Larco, or companies like Rolex, or companies like 1,000,001 of these organizations are doing the same thing. They know full well there needs to be more investment in marketing, there needs to be more investment in design, there needs to be more investment in HR. They know full well that their executives need to be in the office more, and they need to be getting greater on the ground full-time support from the regions. They know all of this stuff, and yet they're not doing it. And it's that classic tragedy of the commons, because what they are doing is going back and remembering that stuff I said earlier about there being an existential crisis. They're expecting that some brands are gonna go belly up, and the companies have got two choices. I take a risk and I serve the common good. I make a risk. I invest. I put some more money into relatively unproductive areas today of things like marketing and product design, and I hope that I can capitalize on a better future. Or conversely, I can retreat. I can contract. I can play safe. I can minimize costs and just hope to outlast my competitors, not grow, not thrive, but just survive until they die, and then I can live off whatever's left over. So how do we as consumers deal with this fact? I think it's in our interest that we have a large, rich, diverse and growing industry, and yet we seem to be surrounded by companies which are increasingly contracting and playing safe. Hence we get this overwhelming return to heritage and return to history and reincarnations and reissues of older watches. How do we change this? Again, we'll go right back to that first bit that I said, that all of this uncertainty and all of this concern and all of this playing safe is all against the backdrop of you and me, watch consumers, the market, the people who buy watches, playing safe. We are the ones We are willing participants in this market. We have agency. We influence the choices of the companies that are selling to us. If we want a more rich watch industry, if we want a more diverse range of watches, if we want some of these brands which provide some more interesting watches to survive, it is entirely within our control. We have to do one thing: buy watches from them. Every time we buy a watch based on resale value, we place another brick in the boring wall, encouraging watch brands to play safe. Every time we defend a watch brand that has not released a new watch in decades by saying that at least they're making profits, we are placing another brick in the boring watch wall. Every time we demand a brand like Panerai get back in its swim lane if it tries to do something new like the Douai, we are placing another brick in the boring watch wall. Every time we demand that watches stay in their swim lane and don't try something new, you get the picture. We're building the boring watch wall. Everything we do that encourages brands to play safe and be boring means that we get safe and boring watches. Every time we as consumers display behaviors that encourage brands to play safe, to stick inside narrowly defined swim lanes, to not try and do something new, every time we kick them if they do try something new, we are setting ourselves up for the environment that we've been talking about. We are setting ourselves up for a watch industry that increasingly services a narrower and narrower community with less and less diversity, with more and more rehashing of just what we have seen before. It's all in our hands. We can get the brands to do more. We can get the brands to do better. We can get the brands to be better watchmakers. But we have to be prepared to take a risk and buy their watches and stay and move away from the safe shallows where watches are predictable and known and comfortable. So that's really my takeaway. Arial spoke a lot about the industry and what the industry needs to change. We as watch consumers can't really influence industry directly. I can do as many vlogs and pieces to camera and shake my fist and say that the company should do X or the company should do Y. But at the end of the day, that doesn't mean anything if you, dear viewers, you, the watch buying community, aren't willing to put your money where your mouth is and try and buy something more interesting. Well, that's it for me. That's actually my rant for the day. I've been Pete McConville. This has been Not So Obvious Watches. If you've liked this video, like it. If you disliked it, dislike the hell out of it. Do me a favor, if you did dislike it, leave me with a comment. If you did like it, leave me with a comment as well. If you wait a little while, a card will come up. It'll have my Instagram details on it. Please give us a follow over there. You'll see more about me and my watches and my life in general. There'll be an email address there as well. Feel free to contact me there if you want. I often forget to do wrist checks. So if you want to know what I'm wearing on any given day, you're more likely to see that at Instagram. Since I did remember, today I am wearing my Panzera Time Master. Wearing this because, some quick channel news, first time ever I've been starting to reach out to some Australian-based micro brands. Panzera have reached back. So with a bit of luck, I'm getting a review piece from them shortly. God forbid, I'm even going to do an unboxing, I think. I think I owe that probably to them and to you if they're giving me a watch. So I'm going to do that through gritted teeth, but that's what I'll do. Anyway, thank you very much for listening to this. I hope it's been interesting, and I'll see you later. Bye.